What if I told you the reality you know is one of many?
This doesn't make any sense.
Not everything does. Not everything has to.
Hello, and welcome to Film Rant. This time we're reviewing Scott Derrickson's new movie Sherlockception. Or is it Benedict Cumberbatch and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat? No, wait, that's it, Doctor Strange. Yes, Marvel's Doctor Strange. I know absolutely nothing about Doctor Strange, and I mean nothing at all, so I'm reviewing this movie purely based on being a Marvel movie. Some of my criticisms may be present in the source material too, but I can't say for sure. Right off the bat though, I didn't go in with high hopes. The trailers do really well to show how cool the visual effects are and not give too much of the plot away, so there was still a lot of mystery going in. However, Scott Derrickson's back catalogue isn't really the best, is it? I mean, Deliver Us From Evil, The Day the Earth Stood Still, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, I mean, not great. But has he produced something good with Doctor Strange? Well, I'm going to go into spoiler territory, so please be aware of that before continuing on. So Benedict Cumberbatch plays our titular hero, Dr. Stephen Strange, who I'm pretty sure was a British musician in the 80s. But nah, Doctor Strange in this sense is more like Harry Potter without the wands and with a more ancient Asian style setup with monks and huts in the middle of mountains and shit. Doctor Strange is a lot like Tony Stark in the sense that he's overly obnoxious, incredibly narcissistic and never really serious about anything. He's a man of science and is incredibly skeptical of anything out of the ordinary. The only real difference I can say between Tony Stark and Doctor Strange is that Doctor Strange is basically a totally unlikable prick. Tony Stark at least has some redeeming qualities outside of his humour. He shows he can be loving, he's willing to totally sacrifice himself to save the world, and he's always been loving to pepper pots. He just suffers from being a bit of an idiot at times. Throughout the three Iron Man movies, both Avengers and Civil War, we see a lot of different sides to Tony. He has many redemption arcs to make up for being a dick. In Doctor Strange, Strange is a cock from the first minute and then becomes an even bigger dickhead when he gets nerve damage from driving like a little chav boy racer and he's decked out Corsa on a Friday night. He's just straight up fucking nasty to his half girlfriend and then he apologises to her later on, but that's it. He has no redemption arc really. I don't think you can argue in hero movies that the hero saved people, so that's his redemption arc. I mean, it's not really true in some aspects. Oliver Queen is a prick but saves people, Tony Stark is a prick and saves people, and Captain America is a self-righteous prick who saves people. But all three of these people have other redeeming qualities. Oliver Queen is always trying to improve himself, Tony is always striving to do the right thing, he just has a big case of fucking it up. Captain America is charming, patriotic and completely selfless. I just never felt attached to Doctor Strange. He doesn't seem to learn anything from his experiences as Marvel's Harry Potter. Maybe it's just me, but I've found Strange to be a deeply unlikable character and that ended up really distancing me from the movie. As for the villain, Caecilius, played by Mads Mikkelsen, he's okay. He falls into the trap of Marvel villains being a bit underwhelming. Throughout the movie he's just trying to connect our dimension to the dark dimension so that Dormammu, who is sort of shown like a fake Galactus in this movie, can take Earth into the dark dimension, sort of similar to what the villain wants to do in Ghostbusters. The clash of powers between Caecilius and Strange was quite interesting to watch and provided some great visual effects work. There was also a few parallels to Star Wars with him when he's caught by Strange and basically tells Strange how the dark dimension is better for all of us. He asks Strange to join him and overthrow the Emperor, the Ancient One, and take over let the Earth be taken by Dormammu. I did actually like that bit. It showed that Strange can be manipulated with enough input as he looks like he's considering what he's saying. It bodes well for an encounter with Loki. But ultimately, Caecilius is just a student with no family who went rogue and wanted to merge us with the Dark Dimension. That's all we really know about him. He's fairly underdeveloped. He looks pretty cool though, sort of like a Mortal Kombat DLC character, but when you get up close, he begins to look like a reject from an 80s glam rock band. The Ancient One, controversially played by Tilda Swinton, is one of the more interesting characters in the movie. She has a mysterious past, is actually likeable, and clearly has the most intrigue about her. I think Tilda did an excellent job in the role, and while I would have liked to have seen more of her, I enjoyed what I got. She was quite funny at times while remaining ever wise and was a strong mentor for Strange. Her death scene was a highlight of the movie, but I'll get to that later. So even though I didn't like the titular character, did the script at least prove to be a saving grace? Well, it wasn't a great sign when in the first 40 minutes of the movie the writing falls down a well, and from then on I knew I wasn't going to be in for a good time. We spend our first few scenes with Strange establishing his character. We immediately see he's a man passionate about science. He's very skeptical of everything without scientific proof, which is obviously a trait he has to cause conflict with his own origin story. That I can get on board with. What I didn't like is that the movie forgets its own character in the first 40 minutes. He finds a guy who he learns has been healed from paralysis. He asks him where he went and what he did to heal. The guy basically says something like, "Oh, I went to Kathmandu and these monks took us into the mountains and healed us up like." Now to me, that immediately sounds like some kind of ritualistic faith healing. I was fully expecting Strange to call bullshit on it and ask for some kind of proof. But no, Strange just blindly accepts this wildly unscientific reason for his paralysis cure and then spends quite a few dollars going to Kathmandu on a wild goose chase. You can argue that Strange was desperate and he was willing to try anything, which in some aspect is true. But later on in the movie, he calls bullshit on the Ancient One when she tells him that she basically does faith healing. Surely Strange would have questioned it right off the bat with the guy at the basketball court and not waited until he was in some temple in Kathmandu talking to a bald chick in a robe. It was just poor writing, not a good sign early on. And I'm afraid it doesn't really improve for the rest of the movie. Outside of the formulaic plot that Marvel seem to incorporate into their MCU movies now, the whole story was just a bit stupid. That bit where Strange was sort of zooming about the Earth and into different Seth Rogen drug trip style environments full of swirly patterns and moving shapes, what the fuck was that? It just looked ridiculous. The car crash he's in at the start, crashes a Lambo off a cliff and does more flips than Tony Hawk, then falls down a mountain and comes to a stop just before he falls into a lake of some sort. The damage? A bit of nerve damage and more cuts than a Jewish maternity ward. Fuck that. He'd be dead. You can suspend your disbelief with these things if the car crash isn't as crazy or violent, but for fuck's sake, he flies down a ravine at 100 miles an hour and somersaults like Simone Biles dodging an onslaught of machine gun fire. Just make the crash more believable, for fuck's sake. He could have just wrapped himself around a tree and still had the same outcome, if a little more believable. But ultimately, I think where the plot really falls apart is at its core. Doctor Strange is a character who uses magic to do his shit, right? It just seems like a strange decision to me that the Marvel execs chose to introduce Doctor Strange into the fairly grounded MCU. Obviously, the MCU has its fair share of paranormal and the extraordinary. After all, they're all based on comic books. But they always try to ground their characters in some sense of reality. Tony Stark is a genius, so can build a revolutionary new weapon. Captain America is the result of a formula that was intended to make the military stronger. Thor is a demigod, but he's basically an alien. I mean, that alone could explain Thor's powers without the whole Norse god stuff. Then you take a look at the Netflix MCU heroes. Daredevil, while he's blind, is still really well grounded. Jessica Jones could definitely exist in the real world, and Luke Cage, while his origin story is a bit meh, he still seems like he could exist at some point in humanity. I'm not someone who craves explanations for everything, but I at least want to see how these heroes could exist in the real world. Now, Doctor Strange offers absolutely no explanation as to how this magic actually works, or even how Doctor Strange gets to use it. I mean, he learns it by studying and practicing. I mean, what's to stop me doing that? What makes him so special? The Ancient One tells him to let go of his ego to do magic, which is basically this movie's version of Free Your Mind from The Matrix. It just seems weak. It's like saying I could actually have achieved Super Saiyan when I was a kid by standing on my bed flexing and screaming if I'd only read a few books and tried harder. If you can do this magic shit by just reading a few books, then why isn't a lot of people doing it? Even looking past that, I think introducing magic to any universe that isn't centered around it is just cheap and allows you to introduce loads of things without explanation. I hated it when they did it in Arrow Season 4, and I hate it in the MCU. And it's because of that I worry how everything is going to play out in the future, or even in the past. Now that Doctor Strange has that Infinity Stone and knows how to use it, can't you just rewind time whenever the Avengers fuck up and stop any threat? Couldn't the Ancient One have stopped Ultron or Loki from descending on the Earth? She preaches this shit about not messing with nature, which sort of explains it, but that can be rendered moot by the end of the movie, where it seems nothing Strange has done seems to have any dire consequence, other than sends that guy on a bit of a bender. I assume that Strange will have this Infinity Stone destroyed or taken away during Infinity War, but even without it, his magic seems to be distinctly more powerful and effective than any of the Avengers' powers. I just really think that introducing him to the MCU sort of kills any realism or threat in future movies. Obviously we'll wait and see, but I don't have high hopes. I may have missed something with this one, but does anybody really react to anything in this movie? Like, we see that bit where Strange does his out-of-body thing in front of his half-girlfriend and she just sort of takes a step back. He nonchalantly tells her it's fine and she just needs to revive him. This is normal and, like, blah blah blah. She just doesn't react like any sane person would. Yeah, sure, this is set in a universe where aliens have invaded and there's a big green monster kicking about, but come on, you'd have some reaction to seeing some kind of ghost. You'd either scream, run, or just straight up faint. I understand that people can't see the, wizards when they're doing the mirror dimension or Inception style thing, so that's fair enough. But what about when Strange casts portals and ends up in the middle of roads in New York or Hong Kong? Nobody bats an eye that a dude in a big fucking red cloak and robes just appeared out of a portal circle in the middle of the street. He's not exactly inconspicuous. It's like having Dumbledore apparate into the middle of Oxford Street. It doesn't even need to give any screen time, just some people in the background reacting to what they just saw. Everyone just seems to blindly accept everything that's happening in the movie, and it just added to it all feeling a bit fucking stupid. Another gripe I had with the plot was just a little thing, but when Strange first encounters Caecilius, he ends up throwing a few of his goons into various parts of the world via those doors that are in the monastery. He then closes the portal and they are left stranded. But why couldn't they just teleport back and get back into the fight? Is there some kind of spell on the monastery like there is so you can't operate into Hogwarts? If that's the case, then fair enough, maybe I missed it, but this was just something I noticed. With regards to the final big villain fight at the end, I feel a little torn. Natalie sums it up pretty well.
Nothing's fine, I'm torn. I'm all out of faith. This is how I feel.
On the one hand, the way Strange handled Dormammu was underwhelming because we're so used to seeing a big fight at the end of a Marvel movie. I sort of wanted that after the movie didn't have an awful lot of action, but at the same time that's a little too formulaic. So on the other hand, I enjoyed that Marvel wanted to try something new by having our hero simply just outsmart the villain and use his power in a non-violent way and more like a checkmate move. It's good to see that Marvel are trying to freshen things up, and I think this entire movie exists solely for that purpose, but for me, it just didn't work. That's not to say there are no good qualities about this movie though. I did really enjoy the way they did the death scene for the Ancient One. How they had her leave her body and Cumberbatch follow her to stand on a balcony of the hospital. She looks out at the city and they have a bit of a heart-to-heart. She tells him how he's one of the best mages since Hansel, and they hold hands in her final moments. She says a great line that's something along the lines of, "I've seen this coming many times and yet here I am," stretching one moment into thousands. That's her last words. I thought that was quite nicely done and it had a very human element to it. Even though she was this all-powerful, all-wise mage, she was still afraid of death, afraid to let go. The comedy in the movie is pretty good too. I've heard a few criticisms saying the movie is a little too comedic for most fans, but to me the plot is the most ridiculous thing about it, so the comedy is very much welcomed. There's a great gag where Strange meets Wong and he questions why he only has one name, asking if it's like Eminem or Shakira or Bono or, well, you get the idea. Then later in the movie, Strange asks for some books, which Wong questions, and Strange says, "Just get me the damn books, Beyonce." They then have a scene where Wong is listening to Beyonce on his iPod. I enjoyed that gag. There's some good visual comedy too with the red cloak. There's a good bit where Strange wants to run in a certain direction and the cloak pulls him in another, and a scene where the cloak just straight up kills a guy by repeatedly slamming his head into the floor. At least in a ridiculous plot, the intentional comedy was fun, so that's a plus. From a technical standpoint, I have to say that the special effects in this movie are absolutely spectacular. I mean, a lot of it we've seen before in Inception, but it's still just as good in this movie. Seeing buildings fall into each other and sort of melt together with this gear-like effect is brilliant. The coolest part of the movie I thought was the fight scene with Caecilius at the end, where everything is happening in reverse while they fight. It was a visual treat to look at and pretty much looked like something straight out of the Matrix. The visual effects are without doubt the highlight of the movie, and you can clearly see that Doctor Strange is a technical marvel. I feel like I have to mention that the Doctor Strange theme that Michael Giacchino composed is pretty much the same as the one used in the recent Star Trek movies, which he also composed. I guess he's a one-trick pony. I mean, listen to this. Cue copyright strike. So overall, Doctor Strange is just a straight up stupid movie with poor writing, an unlikable hero and an underexplored villain. I don't think it fits into the whole MCU very well, and it seems that the MCU is being disconnected from itself, as well as from reality. I think Doctor Strange has introduced a whole new element of pitfalls for future Marvel films to fall into, and I honestly think the MCU would be better off without it. Cumberbatch gives a great performance, and there is an all good scene with some well written comedy. The ending is both underwhelming and refreshing, and it's good to see that Marvel are trying to freshen up their formula. The visual effects are absolutely out of this world, and the movie has a couple of scenes that are wonderful to watch because of them. The theme tune is basically Marvel presents Star Trek, and it seems that Marvel just doesn't want to write good themes for their heroes, something that superheroes sort of inherently need. For me, Doctor Strange is quite possibly the worst MCU movie to date. I'm not saying it is outright, but it could quite possibly be for me. Oh, the new Marvel Studios intro is fucking awesome, by the way, they can keep that in. Doctor Strange gets 2 frames out of 5. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Film Rant.